Happy heresies and welcome to the desert of the real. Heresy shouldn't be this much fun, but it is. It just is, especially when you have arrived at the virtual Alexandria to Aeon Byte. So good to see you, veterans of 1,000 psychic wars, you spiritual entrepreneurs, and you shining crazy diamonds. My name is Miguel Connor, and I am your Pompadas of Gnosis. I hope everybody's having a good Thursday, a good week, and I hope you're preparing yourself for the holidays. What did Ram Dass once say? If you think you're enlightened, spend the holidays with your family. So this is where the rubber meets the road is coming. So as always, it doesn't matter. Let's work on our inner selves. Let's work on our gnosis. Let's work on being the best version of ourselves, our inner peace, and everything will be fine. The stars, the moon, the sky, the planets, they don't care about holidays or this drama. So, but enough of me. Very excited today to be joined by Tricia Eastman to discuss her book, Seeding Consciousness, Plant Medicine, Ancestral Wisdom, and Psychedelic Initiation. Tricia, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Hi, Miguel. I am so honored to be here and so honored to be amongst my family and tribe, everyone that you described. And yes, I mean, isn't that the beauty of this journey of doing this work, of this beautiful inner work, is that we get this beautiful mirror during the holidays to see really how much work have we actually done when we get confronted with the mirror of the people who have raised us. And what a gift, because they are our greatest teachers. They really are our gurus. And so, yeah, this is such a good opportunity to dive deep into the muck, into the negredo, so to say, and seed our consciousness and also learn how we can be connected to our hearts, to our creative power, and to our compassion. So hopefully there's some takeaways that people can bring to the table during the holidays with them.
Well said indeed. And yes, in fact, there was a quote I was going to bring up later, but I thought I'd bring it up now. Your book was great. It's like, I don't even know where to start. It's like an opus. I mean, you've got indigenous mythology, spiritual exercises, personal stories, advice on how to deal with I mean, you've got everything. And we'll talk about how this came to you because it wasn't natural. But of course, I loved your, the show. We talk about Jung and Gnosticism and
Mhm.
Hermeticism. So of course, the alchemy, the ego death is like right in line. But there was this quote by Shannon L. Adler.
Mhm.
I thought about it yesterday, and it was in my head all night because I was reading your chapter on ego and spaces and all that. And she wrote, there is no perfection, only beautiful versions of brokenness. What do you think that? I think that's it's great advice. We came here broken, we came here with our trauma, but it's beautiful, right? It's why we are here and it's part of our mission.
Yeah, and in the tradition, which I am an initiate, which really kind of anchors everything and inspired the book, which is I was in Gabon in 2018 in the Mimbara tradition of the Fang, doing an initiation in 7 days of isolation.
Mhm.
And it came through. And what's beautiful about the Bwiti is that it really goes back to the core creation stories. And you referred to the Library of Alexandria.
Mhm.
Our real stories have been destroyed. Our true stories have been distorted. And these kind of Franken stories have really shaped our culture and actually distorted our culture to where we can't connect to truth. And so I found that in the truth stories, which come in these Gnostic states, that we're able to connect to, really what our brokenness means. And it goes back to the core of the Big Bang. And in
Mm.
Bwiti, it's talked about that essentially all was one. And then in a timeline that exists with all timelines, because time is non-existent, there
Right.
was an explosion. Those pieces were blown apart. That created the tree of life, all of these different archetypal knowledge bodies, and we are all pieces of that. We are all of it, but we are also reassembling the body within ourselves, which is
Wow.
map of our consciousness, and that's how we're seeding consciousness.
Very true. I read that's extremely that's like straight out of Egyptian Gnosticism or Hermeticism. And then, of course, yeah, it's all in the stories. I mean, even in Buddhism, what did the Buddha say? The baby cries because he is wise. Because, oh my God, I've already got trauma, right into this world. Somebody's spanking my butt and I'm coming with all this stuff. And I was so happy in that little lagoon. So, we're all broken. It's what we do with us. But, oh, before we get farther, Graham, how are you doing? Are you bending? Are you breaking?
I prefer to think of myself as, incomplete rather than broken, but still
Mhm.
not perfect.
There you go. Good enough. And yes, Graham is in the chat taking care of your questions. If you have any questions, please super chat them. If you need any questions for Trisha or advice or anything else, let us know so we can get to them. And as always, as I say, please support Aeon Byte any way you can. Like, subscribe, all that one-time donations. Don't forget, you can get now the 3 Astronosis conferences for the price of one. Many ways to support, even crypto, if that's your bag, baby. So let's get to your book. As we were chatting, this book did not come, it was not conscious, right? And like you, I have done many ayahuasca ceremonies with
Oh,
Santo
beautiful.
Daime. That's what I like. And I've learned the plant tells me what to do. And last time I did ayahuasca sessions, we were talking, the plant said, "You're going to write about Elvis." And I was like, "Elvis? I'm a Beatles person." The plant's like, "You are writing about Elvis or else." That happened to you, right? Something similar.
Yeah, it's very interesting because when I feel you get to a certain point of spiritual clarity, and this is different for everyone, you start to engage with, the primordial templates of the universe. And, through Gnostic, true gnosis, where you connect to those. But I also feel that you start to connect to guiding spirits or even a collective guiding spirit. And one of the spirits that really has connected with me and started about 10 years ago, I call it the ancestral heart, because I believe that it's the voice of the ancestors, because it has this deep, old kind of primordial truth to it. And so this voice has been giving me like very detailed instructions, and I'm not just blindly following them all, because I think the secret in this path, and I talk about this in the book, is discernment. That we are these open antennas, and there's things that can distort our signal. We can be more clear at sometimes versus other times, and we can also when we're starting to open this channel, not necessarily discern if what we're receiving is the ego or this voice of truth. So I always ask, it starts with getting the messages, getting the pieces. And I think the hardest part is um if there's only a piece of the story, not filling in the blanks.
Mm.
Like, yeah, you're writing a book about Elvis, but then, what are the other pieces of that? So I first ask, more information, and I wait to get that information. I don't just start until I've received that. And then I also ask for confirmation. I remember in 2019, I got a really clear message that I was to bring the Zulu tribe from South Africa to Burning Man. And
What?
so I brought like 8 Zulu drummers and dancers to the playa, which was a lot of work and really crazy. And obviously, I wouldn't want to
Wow.
take that on unless it was like a true message, not something my ego would do to prove something. And I'd only been to Burning Man twice. So it wasn't like this was my third time going. It wasn't like I was like this diehard burner that was wanting to do something on the playa. But I got like 3 confirmations very clearly that it was something that needed to be done. And that's when I knew that I needed to move forward with that instruction. So with seeding consciousness, I was in Gabon. I was in an initiation. This was 2018. And I was in this chamber, very deeply connected in this lineage of Bwiti, the Fang Bwiti, which believe that they came from ancient Egypt, which there is a lot of evidence, even though it's not publicly talked about, that the Bwiti were in Egypt. There's actually a town called Bawiti. And I have a very intricate hypothesis, and I believe that Bes, the god of happiness and drunkenness and joy, who's connected with Hathor, is actually a pygmy, which are the forest-dwelling people of equatorial Africa. And it was the pygmies that actually lived in a village in the town of Bwiti, and they advised the pharaohs, and my understanding, and this is all from indigenous wisdom. Indigenous wisdom is passed down around the fire in story versus Western wisdom is written in books. And so a lot of times, indigenous wisdom is refuted because it doesn't have, the same kind of historical references. So, in the story, essentially, the Bwiti were the advisors. They played harp for the pharaohs, the Bwiti harp, which is really beautiful. It's an 8-string harp. And they were very favored, and they worked with, this sacred medicine, which I am an initiate, Iboga. And, in the chambers in these temples in Egypt, for example, the Great Pyramid, you have the king's chamber, the queen's chamber, and these were places of initiation. They were not tombs. And so I think now there's a little bit more modern Egyptologists that are starting to recognize that these were not burial chambers, that these were places of initiation, and many of these initiatic instructions and initiations were around death and rebirth. So it would be easy to make the mistake that it was a place of death or a place of burial, but it was actually a place of ego death, of death and rebirth. So in this chamber in Gabon, it is a replica of Egypt, and there are 3 temples. And so I've done initiations in 2 of the 3 temples. I've done 4 initiations in one of the temples, and I've done 1 in the other temple. And I'm going back to do the second initiation because I was called, which is interesting because the initiation that I did in 2018 was in that temple, which is called Mimbara. Mimbara is the lineage of Ma'at. And the Bwiti believe that it's the lineage of obviously truth and justice, because Ma'at is the goddess who waits for you at the end of the duat when you cross through, and she weighs your heart against the feather. And if you follow the 42 ideals, which are original principles, essentially primordial original principles, then you have a light heart. And so you're able to cross through. If you don't, you have to reincarnate and learn all of your lessons all over again. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, my teacher, Atum Rabenga, who passed a couple years ago, who is the father of Okala village, the village that I received this initiation, he believes that life is a school and that we're here to learn. And it's actually one of the most rigorous universities of the entire cosmos. Earth is the toughest because we have this duality that exists here that is more dense than any of the other planets. To how he describes it, I can't say. I haven't been to every planet, and I just haven't connected. If I had past life memories of it, I haven't connected with them yet. But in this initiation, I got very, very clear instructions that this book needed to be written. And it was really like a framework of how are we holding this way of working with psychedelics in our society? And more importantly, how are we holding this life cycle, this phase that we're in, which many of the indigenous prophecies, such as the eagle and the condor prophecy, talk about as crossing through this dark bardo. So
Mm.
we are crossing through that right now as we speak. How do we get through that? And these are the tools. This is a sequence, it's a journey arc of all of the different things that, in having kind of a basic understanding, can allow us to really heal ourselves, surrender to the process, and also to break any myths in our head that psychedelics, taking a pill or doing some spiritual practice, is going to end suffering, because that's not what life is all about.
No, no, not at all. Not at all. In fact, sometimes it gets harder because things just come up. And again, the broken people, the wounded healer in shamanism, or the redeemer in Gnosticism, that's the one in charge, the shaman, the one who sees the pain and knows the pain and carries the pain. And often that individual doesn't want to heal their pain because they're worried, if I lose my pain, how can I heal others? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but so you would say we are definitely at a changing of the era, whether it's the end of the Kali Yuga,
Yeah.
Pluto in Aquarius. I mean, so many myths are pointing that we're changing, and I think your book says it's going to be all right if your eyes are open, if you're awake, you're going to be okay. Change is fine.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it. Like, in initiation, when you cross into initiation, if you're
Mhm.
truly ready, if you're like, the worst thing you can do is go off to Gabon and get initiated in Bwiti because your will wants to do it, because you want to prove something. You're probably going to die or have a really difficult experience. But when you're truly stepping into an initiation and you're owning that within yourself and you're willing to face whatever is going to come up, you just realize the illusion that we live in, that the things that are the scary monsters are reflections of our consciousness. And I love the story of Pada Sambhava, when he went into the cave and he spent, who knows how many years, and he confronted this monster, this demon. And the demon, he just sat in front of him and faced him for so long that eventually the demon said, I am in service to you. For you to
Mhm.
just stare at me like this and be in complete compassion and love, I want what you're having, like, I'm in suffering and I'm here to cause suffering to you because I'm
Yeah,
in suffering. I want to spread that suffering. But instead, he, just by sitting with that demon, was able to essentially transform that demon into a deity.
beautiful.
And so, I believe we all have those demons. I believe that we all have that darkness within us. And what you were saying about the wounded healer, so my initiatory name, when you get initiated, you meet your soul. And when you meet your soul has its own name. And in Bwiti, in the Mumbayano initiation, you go specifically to meet your soul. And so think of it like this, like you take, like you've worked with ayahuasca or psilocybin mushrooms, and, you're in this beautiful container. Maybe you've set some intentions in that container and you have an experience. In initiation, at least in this particular initiation, which it can be different from many of the different initiations in Bwiti, but this one in particular, your job is to meet your soul and find the name of your soul. And that's all you're meant to do. So it's a
Wow.
very active initiation. One of the initiations that I did, which was actually a different initiation, you had to do this staring into the mirror at yourself. And when you're on just like amounts of Iboga to the point where you can, I mean, the analogy is trying to stand up in a canoe in the ocean during a hurricane, like you can barely walk and you feel nauseous and you have to sit up straight and you have to look in the mirror. And essentially, the mirror in this initiation is a portal to the spirit world. So the
Mhm.
reflection of yourself is actually the soul version of yourself. And the aim of this initiation is to connect with your soul and find out what your soul's name is, just like these other initiations. In the Mumbayano tradition, not only do you meet your soul and get your soul's name, but you also have to afterwards go to a traditional Gabonese tailor and have a costume made of your soul. And then after you have this costume made, you always wear it in ceremony. And some people have multiple Mombayanos, which I believe are kind of our core archetypes of,
Mhm.
our soul essence. Like, what are those archetypal essence?
Yeah. No, it's amazing and beautiful and useful. But again, I was thinking of Carl Jung, and again, how these stories are archetypal or mythic, because when Jung had his breakdown and everything was falling apart and he isolated himself from the world and people thought he was having a psychotic breakdown, he went into this room and he simply said, my soul, where are you? And he went down and the red book came out and all of his depth psychology ideas came from that journey that he went down to find his soul. And of course he had the name Philemon. Simon Magus was the name of. So I think it's amazing how these are it's like, yeah, the answer's there in every culture and every time. We just don't want to listen. And the idea of staring at the demon, I was like, I'm going to try that with my cat. I wonder if it'll work if I can outstare my cat. Nah, it won't do what I want. So I love that. I love that mythology. But Trisha, the idea of ego death, which you talk in your book, and you talk
Mhm.
about ego templates and so
Mhm.
much. What is ego death? Because again, that's something that Western society is still trying to figure out. Like, people say, well, I want my ego to die. And others say, well, if you don't have an ego, you won't be able to live, So what do you mean by ego death? And how do we go about it?
So, I feel like we're always going through a form of integration because there are the shadow parts of the ego.
No.
And I feel like there's parts of our ego that are meant to serve, like the true essence of who you are when you're born as a child is this pure ego. And I explain in this idea of individuation, which also Carl Jung talks about, that we develop this template between the ages of 0 and 7 years old. And it's through these programs, which a lot of it is ancestral trauma, societal trauma, that gets kind of programmed in. So I believe that there's two aspects of it. One aspect of the ego death is these parts of ourself that are holding on, that aren't surrendered, that are getting in the way. I believe that when we are purified, which we do through all of these spiritual cleansing processes, whether it's through initiation, yoga, breath work, but
Mhm.
once we're purified, um, everything's on autoplay. Really, like your life is this beautiful movie that is meant to play for you, and your job is just to fully express yourself, to be in your creative gifts and receive that. Obviously the journey is the ego, and the ego isn't a bad thing in my opinion. It's the fuel that gets you to the end of the journey. So when you look at the idea of the Negredo in alchemy, it's the crude oil that converts into light or into the gold in alchemy. And it's through this process of separating these parts of ourselves out and being with them. Being with yourself is the deepest act of self love, giving you presence, giving attention to yourself. And that could be, even if it's just 15 to 30 minutes a day where you're just doing a review and you're just feeling what are your triggers, what's coming up for you, and then honing in on one piece. And as we're bringing all of those pieces together, that's the concept of soul retrieval. So in the ancient initiatic traditions, like the lineage of Isis and Osiris back in Egypt, that's the idea of soul reclamation. What shamans do is they support the process of bringing back these pieces of ourselves. And I call it in my book soul kintsugi. Kintsugi being the art of Japanese repair, where something that's broken is glued back together, but then mended with gold. And so the idea of our self-love is the idea of painting the gold in the cracks, which makes something even more beautiful and valuable. And that's like the wise elder. I've never met a wise elder in any tradition, whether it was, one of my mentors, Malidoma Patrice Somé, or my Bwiti father, Atum Rubinga, that didn't have a beauty to the patina of how his trauma or her trauma wore on them over the years. And there was something beautiful to that because it was connected to such a deep wisdom, unconditional love, and understanding, which essentially is like that Japanese pottery that has been pieced back together, to think of all the tears that were cried, to think of, just every line and every wrinkle connected to a moment of joy or a moment of suffering. And so that's one side of it. And then the other side of it is the idea of the ego death that happens in a psychedelic experience, which is very much a fast forward process of death and rebirth, which is essentially attuned to crossing through the birth canal. And in that process, essentially, and I love using the analogy of chakras and Kundalini because, I've seen this 2,000 times on 5-MeO DMT. I've worked with over 2,000 people, and it always happens in the same way. Not everyone gets through the birth canal, so to say, but it always happens in this exact staging process, which is first you have the onset. And in the onset, you start to like shake and feel uncomfortable and maybe nauseous. And that's all the debris of the ego, like essentially sloughing off. And as that process is happening, these psychedelics, whether it's ayahuasca, peyote, San Pedro, Iboga, 5-MeO DMT, psilocybin mushrooms, they all have a unique way of opening the chakras. And as they open the chakras, the Kundalini travels up those chakras. And that's what puts us into these different dimensions where we're actually traveling. We may have a felt sense of our body, but we are, in essence, having an interdimensional experience. And so when we're in the lower chakras, we're still very much in the physical world. It's not until we get to the solar plexus chakra, which is our sense of self, our ego, and our inner child, which is why usually in these experiences, if someone has a lot of things stuck in these lower chakras, they have to purge first. Like in ayahuasca, usually pretty early in the journey, you have
Tell
to
me
throw
about
up
it.
some stuff. And that is usually after it's like that tightness of going through the birth canal, your head's like barely coming out, and then you finally get out and you feel this sense of openness. And that's when the Kundalini's actually gotten into the heart chakra. And I see this very common with people too, because it's very hard to surrender and let go, especially because the ego wants to keep us in the physical realm, because that's where it can keep us safe. If it
That's its
surrenders,
job.
that's its job. And so people get stuck, and it's usually that spot right where the rib cage meets right before the heart, that kind of top point. People just like feel like, oh, I've got some energy stuck here, and maybe they need to throw up. Maybe they just need to like breathe deeper and breathe into it. And when they start returning to the fullness of their breath, the ego starts to let go. They go into their heart, goes up to the throat chakra, goes up to the third eye. In 5-MeO-DMT, it's one of the few psychedelics. Ayahuasca can give you this feeling of out-of-body experience, but not everyone even has visions on ayahuasca. But I would say 5-MeO is like more of a likelihood. Like if you look on the mystical experiences scale and the likelihood of having a mystical experience with specific psychedelics, you're going to have a much higher scoring with 5-MeO-DMT than with other psychedelics. So a mystical experience is timelessness, spacelessness, ineffability, that feeling of oneness, of kind of rejoining, like was it Rumi who says the drop rejoining the ocean, for instance. And so it's this feeling of like unity, of feeling connected to the web of life. And so in that feeling, I truly believe that that's when the consciousness is leaving the body through the third eye. So the Kundalini has gone all the way up. And then you're in the crown chakra, which the crown chakra is that, kind of every quality that you could rank within the mystical experience scale that I just mentioned. So that's the ego death. The ego death is the sick part where we're literally shedding the skin, and then we're relaxing into it, feeling that sense of love, feeling that sense of connection. And I love it even in psychedelics, where even like in pathogens like MDMA, which may only get you up to the heart, and it might not be a full ego dissolving experience. The ego's still there. There still might be a voice of conversation in the head engaging in inner dialogue, but you still have this dissolving of separation where you have an urge to forgive others for wrongdoings, or you recognize your own wrongdoings and you have an urge to forgive yourself, and like, oh, I need to go talk to my wife or my dad or whoever and apologize for what I did. So there definitely is value in the psychedelic experience when we have, this opening where you start to connect into these more, I would call them higher frequencies of love and unification.
Thank you. That's beautifully said. Yeah, when I did ayahuasca, I had three astral flights. Two were up, and one I went as the Clash song goes, straight to hell. Oh man, I went to hell for a few years. What am I saying? I experienced years of this place, but it was a purging. And you talk about Iboga. I've heard that it's even stronger than ayahuasca, although I always thought ayahuasca was the strongest narcotic in the world.
It's the strongest plant medicine that exists on the planet.
Wow.
It number one has the most sophisticated alkaloid profile. It works on every neurotransmitter in the body except for like a couple.
Wow.
Like for example, the endocannabinoid receptors. It doesn't work on those because that's cannabis. But it works on every neurotransmitter, dopamine, serotonin, kappa opioid. It's most widely known as a addiction interrupter. So one of the alkaloids, ibogaine, works on those kappa opioid receptors and completely resets it, so that someone who's in addiction can literally walk away with no cravings, so they don't experience all of the really horrific detox symptoms. But what happens in the journey itself, it is very challenging, very hard, dangerous. Like if you're not in the right health to do it, there is a risk of death, and people do die from Iboga and from ibogaine. But what happens is it cuts off all your senses, and you know how ayahuasca kind of expands your auric field.
Yeah.
And for me, when I work with ayahuasca, I feel like it almost takes me like a week to even just get my aura back into my body. I feel like I'm walking like 2 feet
Right.
above the ground, as where Iboga puts your auric field in your body. So what that means is, like, if you look at each one of your chakras, they represent kind of this rainbow gobstopper of your field, and each of those is your senses, like all of your extra perception, which are the different intuitive senses, but also your feeling, sensing, seeing, tasting, touching. So it takes all that and pulls it into your body. So the only thing you can do is focus on yourself. And it has this deep regenerative effect, but by pulling all of that inward and by like facing everything. There was a recent study released by Nolan Williams at Stanford that it turns back the brain aging by 1.3 years.
Wow.
So I think it's one of the most neuroregenerative medicines. It's being studied for Parkinson's, for Alzheimer's. I worked at a clinic in Mexico. That's how I got started with Iboga, and we transitioned into a program called Mission Within, where we started working with special ops veterans. So I was doing a lot of work with like Navy SEALs, and these Navy SEALs had horrific trauma from, watching people on the battlefield, to losing their platoon mates, to traumatic brain injuries, all of these different things. And so just to see how much it had transformed all of their lives. And now it's actually created this like revolution, which has changed the dynamic of the entire psychedelic movement, because there's been so many veterans now that have stemmed off and started their own nonprofits and their own foundations, which actually changed the political landscape. It used to be that, pro psychedelics was a kind of partisan thing, more like democratic, but now actually the Republican support for psychedelics. And I'm lucky enough that I get to write bills on both sides, like state
Cool.
stuff. I've been to the World Economic Forum and made recommendations for different countries, such as Abu Dhabi. And what's interesting is the political landscape has changed, because a lot of it is because of the veterans that have gotten so much healing from this. And just to see the veteran suicide rates being so high, and to see that almost instantaneously flip. I mean, obviously there's thousands and thousands and thousands of more people that need therapies, and more than just Iboga, like a lot of different support. But it's brought attention to something and been a really incredible case study in looking at the veterans that have received this treatment and how it's transformed their life. So it's a hard journey. It's grueling. Obviously, people who have already been tested to their core, like Navy SEALs, are going to do really well with it. Anyone who's been a professional athlete, climbed Mount Everest, they get the benefits of it. And the journey itself isn't necessarily pleasurable. I mean, I've spent days in the underworld, in hell. I've thought that I've lost my soul and that I
Like,
was
I'm
not
not getting out of here. I'm stuck, right?
I'm stuck forever, and just like having to face
Yeah.
the saddest, most exiled parts of myself, and thinking that I was going to be stuck in that place. But on the other side of the coin, coming out of it, the transformation that I've seen in my life has just been so profound. And I mean, I'm someone that, as far as wounded healers go, my father being schizophrenic, which I talk about early in the book, I inherited some massive ancestral trauma. And I feel like incredibly fortunate that this medicine found me. And because of that, I pledged my support early on. My first experience back in 2014, I said to the medicine, how can I serve you? And so literally that's when the ancestral heart started talking to me. It was like, oh, you want to be of service? We got work for you to do. So yeah.
But it's something we should clarify, and I hope I'm saying this right, Tricia. Somebody who was in rehab on the streets, I was, traumatic life, drug life, all that. The drug is not the cure. I don't know how to explain it. The drug or the plant is like, for me it is Hermes, is that, or the goddess, Artemis, who I name Artemis. That's the person that walks with me down into hell to face the dragon and face my thing and helps me. Am I saying this right? Because we live in a society where people think if I pop a pill, that's a cure. And I used to believe that. And I realized, no, the drug is not the cure.
I mean, not everyone gets healing from psychedelics. One thing that we learned from the 60s and 70s is if you don't take them in the proper setting, they don't do anything. And you can even go back to the times of the, Salem witch trials. It was believed that the mold from the rye bread created LSD, and then these Christians were having visions of demons which were really their own shadow, and that they were essentially blaming it on the witches who were actually consciously working with this sacrament, and essentially they were killed for it. But really the medicine, like Iboga, for example, takes you through a life review. It shows, many people see the scenes in a movie. It physically heals your body. And in the culture of Bwiti, it is believed that when you are given the opportunity to be initiated, they call it mustanza, which means good luck, like the fact that you got this opportunity, or they call it mabondo, which means grace. And so essentially, when you go in and you get this initiation, it's a reset of all the traumas in your life. And then there's this window, and there's a really incredible researcher. I'm totally forgetting her name. She did the study on the octopuses with MDMA. I was just hanging out with her in New York a few weeks ago, and she was telling me that Iboga has the longest window of this neuroplasticity, like months after taking it, like this window is open. And that's essentially in the indigenous culture of Bwiti. What they're talking about is this window of Musanza or Mabondo is your opportunity to make changes in your life, to set a new timeline for yourself. And so that's the core understanding, and why we need the indigenous wisdom or modern interpretations that translate this framework, which it's not just about the set and setting that they talked about, like Timothy Leary or any of these other researchers in the 60s and 70s talk about. It's the preparation, it's the integration. And then when you deeply go into the core components of these knowledge systems, you go back to Eleusis, you go back to the Egyptian initiations. It was many months of preparation to do one initiation. And so, that whole process involves spiritual baths where you're doing a life review and you're looking at all the things, all the mistakes that you've made. You're cleansing that away. And then when you get to the point where you take the sacrament, whether it's ayahuasca, iboga, psilocybin mushrooms, it's not having to do all the heavy lifting. It's not having to clean out all that sludge of the inner child work that you didn't already do, all the things out of the way, so that you can have a mystical experience. And if you look at the healing outcomes of mystical experience in itself, people who have mystical experiences and how they are afterwards, that's the highest outcome of healing. And I truly believe that if our society can, whether it's through psychedelics or other practices, set up these containers, it can be through fasting, it can be through sweat lodge, it can be through dark room meditation, which I talk about in the ego death chapter,
Right.
all of these things. But if people are in these frameworks, they're going to have a higher likelihood of having a vision, having some kind of mystical experience that's going to reset the course of their life in a positive way. And once we get connected to our authentic self, we stop being the hungry ghost. We stop consuming. And I truly believe that this meta crisis that we're in, we are on the tipping point of complete destruction of our species. The Kogi say we're going
Agreed.
to lose 30% of the biodiversity of our planet between now, they said starting June 2024 and 2026, we're going to lose 30% of the biodiversity of our planet. We've already lost so much, but it's going to be this tipping point if we don't really quickly get into this mode of unifying together, healing ourselves. I mean, we have to stop fighting. We have to,
Yeah.
you know,
Agreed.
we but I believe, like, when you look at the idea of Jung and you look at the idea of like the hermetic principles, such as like the emerald tablets of
Mhm.
Thoth, as above so below, our oceans are dirty with our plastics and our waste and our toxins and our pollutants. And I believe the ocean is a physical manifestation of the subconscious mind. And so we all need to start cleaning our subconscious minds. And I think as a result, there will be this kind of as above, so below, where the activities that we do will have an exponential result in how we transform the planet and transform ourselves.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Yes, we've got, for those of you who just joined or joined a little late, Tricia Eastman is taking us on a journey with her book, Seeding Consciousness. Graham, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds very much like what she's talking about is like a forced feedback loop for the consciousness, where you're forced to deal with your problems and deal with all of that and work through it, by way of the drug. Am I reading that properly? Tag.
Absolutely, Graham. Yeah, I mean, I believe that the entire universe is always mirroring back to us our inner environment. And that's why I think that psychedelic integration is so important, because how do you know if you've actually changed if you don't see the world changing around you? And so I do feel like taking that time after each journey versus going every weekend and meeting your group and drinking ayahuasca. You really need to have that biofeedback loop. You need to go hang out with your family and see how that mirror has changed. And when you look at Bwiti, which I believe is one of the oldest indigenous traditions, that really dates back to the beginning of these knowledge systems, the whole system itself is a very intricate game. And the game is all about that biofeedback loop. So, for example, when you're in ceremony, there's very specific words and things that you say and ways that you mirror back that show that the community is collectively in ceremony together. Like, for
Mhm.
example, when you want to speak, or when the Nima, who's the initiator, or Ganga is a healer who is, doing the ceremony or performing the rituals or rites, the first thing you say is bukaye, and everyone says aye. And that's how you know that they're paying attention. And there's this constant feedback loop within the whole ritual of doing it, which essentially mirrors that way of being, of understanding, of the mirror. And it's so funny because the more that we live in that acknowledgement, the more comical the entire, like, even like words and signs, and like when you're really paying attention to what's showing up in your field, it just gets like almost hilarious. The word bukaye is kind of like the Ouroboros. So it's the idea of the first breath and the last breath. So it's that breathing of all life and the totality of life coming together. The other word that is really important in Bwiti that is used constantly in ceremony is base. And base is said a lot. Many times it's base, base, or base, base, base. And it means truth. So everything in the idea of connecting to the medicine, in being in ceremony, in being in community, is ultimately to connect to truth.
Beautifully said again. And another important part of your book that I definitely want to get to, and well, let me back up because this also deals with Hermeticism, again, perennial wisdom, as they call it, because I think your book agrees and your ideas agrees with the Hermetic idea and the Corpus Hermeticum, that the way to see the world is that we are humans. We have a special place. We are not the gods or the spirits or the angels, whatever, but we are not the animals. We are unique. We stand between heaven and earth. As Terry Pratchett said, we are where the fallen angel meets the rising ape. But we have a responsibility. Like Gary Lockman said, we are the caretakers of the cosmos. We have a role. It's just as important as the gods, just as important as the animals, no more nor less. So knowing our place once again, that's when the magic happens. That's when we realize we had telepathy. That's when we realize we can heal and all this other stuff. So again, I love how this comparative mythology is screaming at us in the face to get our S together and get back to where we belong, like the Beatles sang, even though I wrote about Elvis. But anyway, what in your book talks about solar and lunar powers, which again, very hermeticist. Maybe can you share with the audience about that?
Yeah, on one side, the solar powers are really connected to our spirit essence, and the lunar energy is more connected to our inward nature, or connected to the element of water, and more connected to earth, like the presence and grounding of being in earth. But if you look at it, from the idea of the mind, we're talking about the left and right hemisphere of the brain. And so, in our culture, our brains have actually developed to where our left brain is actually bigger than our right brain. And the reality is, it's the gift of the bridging of the hemispheres. Like, true genius is the bridging of the left and right hemisphere together. It's the, two sides meeting that really is the birth of this greater mystical intelligence than the two parts combined. And what I would say is, if you look at Einstein, his genius, his brain was studied after his death, and he has one of the most well-developed corpus callosum of anyone that's been researched. And it looks like we lost. Are you still there, Graham?
I am indeed. I'm following along. Thank you. Keep going.
Should I keep going? Okay. So one of the most well-developed corpus callosum, and that was because he not only studied science and mysticism, but he also played music, and he also spent a lot of time in nature. And so really, I think in our society, when I talk about the idea of fire, is we've got like really connected to this element of fire in a way that we've become the moth to the flame. You know, anything I think in excess becomes the poison rather than the medicine. And so it's like restoring our connection to the fire. That's the idea of reconnecting to the elements, whether it's having a fireplace in your home, going out in the woods and obviously safely creating a campfire, but really connecting back into the fire. And then also in, you know, the tradition of Bwiti, we connect to the moon, and the idea of the moon is the feminine. And so it's the idea of connecting to the water, connecting to the element of the moon. And as we're connecting to the element of the moon, we actually open this portal into the spirit world. So many times when we're working with the medicine with others, we use the moon as a tool to connect and engage and talk to the ancestral realm. Miguel, you're back. I'm so sorry.
I lost power. We had our first snowstorm. I'm in the Midwest, so now I'm a guest. I'm like you, Trisha. I'm just a guest. So apologies.
No, so you have no power right now?
Yeah, I'm using my phone. I'm on my phone. So we're up
Okay.
the Wi-Fi, whatever, the tower thing. But yes, we lost our power, so now I don't have any Wi-Fi. I had
Isn't that
what happened, especially with the first storm of the year.
isn't that kind of a synchronicity as we're talking about the fire? And in the very beginning of the chapter, I talk about how, you know, really the reason that we've gotten disconnected from fire is in our past societies, we used fire for everything. I remember growing up in Seattle, there was the history of the Great Fire of Seattle in the early 1800s, and it completely decimated the city, and they had to rebuild it. Then, you know, with the invention of electricity and light bulbs, we lost this connection to the element of fire. And now even more so, because, you know, for a long time we also cooked on gas, and now, you know, a lot of society, and even unfortunately there are governments and even the World Economic Forum that are trying to ban the idea of cooking with fire. I actually, when I was working on my project in the Azores, building our retreat center, I had to fight the fire department to have gas in my kitchen, because in Europe they're trying to get rid of and then like the people in the island were like the architect and the general contractor were like, oh, that's so old school. And I'm like, no, it's not. We have to be connected to fire. Fire puts chi, life force energy in your food. And, you know, I've studied tea. I've been studying Qigong for the last 13, almost 14 years. And the idea of the Qigong ritual is the idea of the fire and the water coming together. So you're boiling the water with the fire, and then the tea leaves tell their mystical secrets to you in meditation by bringing the fire and the water together and pouring that over the tea leaves. And so it's such a sacred relationship, this union between the fire and the water. And we as a society really need to protect the idea of fire. If we treat it with respect, it can't hurt us. I know people who were in the fires in California who made offerings to their land. They made water blessings. They did prayers. Literally, the fire went around the property line and completely did not touch the house. I know someone in Costa Rica where the exact same thing happened. And I truly believe that when we are connected to these things, when we are connected within ourselves, just like that mirror that we were talking about of what's within, so without, that we actually create that protection within us. Like in the Bwiti culture, you get what's called a vaccination. That's the French translation. And it's nothing like our vaccines in Western culture. It's actually a spiritual ceremony. The skin is cut. There's specific saps and herbs that are put into the skin, and these are for anti-sorcery. So it's believed that when things that are negative fall upon us, it's because of some imbalance, and it can be an ancestral trauma that's something that's kind of like a ticking time bomb in our field, or it can be something that we've created by walking for a long time out of balance. But when we do these rituals, what it does is it restores the balance, it restores the harmony with nature. And the Kogi, Kagaba, who live in the La Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, they are some of the most wise indigenous masters of communication with nature. And the Mamus spend at least 9 years in darkness in a cave. I've met Mamus that spent 27 years in darkness, in complete isolation. And so when they come out of the cave, their job is to be caretakers of the planet, just like our job as all humans, as a keystone species, is to be stewards of the planet. And the main things that they are responsible for are, number one, making pagamentos, which are offerings to nature. So they go to all of the sacred sites of the planet, which they only know what they are. They know how to communicate with the land, to know where is the mouth of the land, where does it take in the nourishment, and where is the place that it excretes energy, the opposite side. And they make those offerings. And then they're like acupuncturists. They have specific sacred objects that act as keys to the land that unlock healing for them, so they can literally go to a sacred site. Like, obviously we think of sacred sites, I think, in more of a Western culture, is like things like the Pyramid of Giza, or the pyramids in Mexico, or places that are more well known, as where they the Kogi believe that they are everywhere, all over, that there's these little acupuncture points. But if the Kogi were to go and stand in front of one of these sacred sites, they would go in and they would ask, like, what's its food? What's its offering? What key do I need to use to unlock it? And then what that does is it essentially, it's like they're kind of being the plumber. They're turning the energy back on, because those sacred sites essentially help maintain the consciousness, which is the web of life, which is essentially the kundalini of the planet that allows all life to flourish. So that's their job. And one of the things that they do is they manage the water cycles of the planet. So they make sure that the water comes from the ocean, turns into clouds, goes up into snow, melts, goes down the creeks and rivers, and then goes back down into the ocean again. And the way that they can understand if there's a problem with a water cycle within a sacred area that they're working in, a territory, is they read bubbles in the water. So they have a special modality of divination where they literally read the bubbles and the water talks to them, and they believe that it's a living entity. And I believe that water is a living entity, as is fire.
Oh, I would agree with you. Certainly 100%. Yeah. And thanks for sharing. Well, we better get to the end. I'm here in the dark. I've got to probably help the family find candles and all that and figure out what's going on. Yeah, I could use some fire right now. We were able to keep going, always have a plan B. So as we get to the end, Tricia, please tell the audience where to find out more about you. I already have your web address on the show notes, but tell the audience where to find more about, or where do you want to send them?
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody, and you can go to ancestralheart.com, which is my nonprofit. doing a lot of this indigenous-led reciprocity work with the Kogi, with the Bwiti, with many other indigenous knowledge keepers that are stewards of the land and will help us to get out of this meta crisis that we're in, because they understand how the land needs to be tended to and stewarded. And you can order the book on Amazon. And I really, really appreciate any reviews, because I just want this to get out there to the world. You know, I wrote it as my integration homework, but I just want it to be able to help a lot of people. So thank you, Miguel, for this opportunity. And thank you. And I'm sorry the power went out, but it seemed very synchronistic, or I don't know what, but really interesting.
We carry on. And yes, for the audience, we just covered maybe 10% of the book. There's so much treasures and voyages and insights and things that you will really enjoy. It's truly an opus, and I'm glad you were allowed to bring it through the portals into the world. And you're doing something in the Azores. I was born in Lisbon. I've never been to the Azores. Most of my mom went there once, and she couldn't believe how clean the air was. But tell the audience about that. Oh, and also for the audience, Ronaldo's not Portuguese. He's from the Azores. Just being a little brat about that, but yeah, he was born in the islands.
Wow. Yeah, you know, this came through one of my many meditations to the ancestral heart in 2019, right before COVID. So right when it was starting to, you know, things were starting to happen in Wuhan, China. And I was told it was time to build a center. And I said, where? And it said, the Azores. And I'm like, where's that? And I look it up on a map. I'm like, you want me to build a retreat center in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? And I asked the name, and it said Hugh. And I was like, that's an interesting name, 2 letters. Look that up, and it's the tongue of Thoth. It's the sound that's made when wisdom enters the initiate. So I truly believe this is a center of transference of wisdom through nature, through the ancestors, through, you know, all of these incredible modalities of how we connect to consciousness, and through indigenous wisdom. You know, having different elders come, you know, having an original house of thought where, you know, we can have a forum of, you know, scientists coming together. And I've done a lot of work. I've been doing teaching at Stanford University. My husband's been working with Harvard. And there are a lot of like new collaborations where we're seeing, you know, the indigenous wisdom being at that same level of being respected in those forums, and we're seeing this coming together. So I feel like this is going to be a really incredible place of learning and collective collaboration. It'll be open in 2026, and we have hot springs on our land, so it's also kind of like a little mini Esalen of the EU.
Awesome. Well, I might have to visit you on the way to Lisbon next time for sure. It sounds amazing. Awesome. Well, I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. We are at the end. I wish I could see the audience, but I can't even see the chat on YouTube. But I know everybody's really enjoying it. And of course, the audio version will be out tomorrow. But first, Graham, thanks for keeping us company.
Thank you.
More than welcome. It was my pleasure, and I'm sorry I didn't recover a little faster for you there, Miguel. Next time I will.
Well, the button on the top end the stream. You're in charge. I can stream. If we leave, it be like an empty room on all sides. But so hit that. But Tricia, thank you very much for coming on the show, and good luck with everything. Keep spreading that light, and yeah, let's. We shall overcome the family, and better times are coming if we're just
yes. Oh my God. Thank you so much, Miguel. And I can't wait to read your book on Elvis. I'm sure it's going to be the coolest transmission ever. And just really, really excited to be connected. Thank you to everyone who is out there listening.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I was going to say bye, everyone. Go ahead, sign off, Miguel.
All right. Bye, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.